one of the real pleasures of this Ringknocker gig is the sense of serendipity, right? People tend to show up at the right people show up at exactly the time that you need them. So this week's speaker is a good example. Raise your hand if you got kids in college. Really? There we go. We got a couple. Okay. Thought we'd have more than that. Well, anyway, Mike Ray joined us first on the 18th of June and was able to come back and introduce himself about a month later. And for those who are counting, at that point, we had about 5 to 6 weeks until the kids go back to school, depending on the college. So during his intro, we discovered that Mike is a public health expert who's got a particular focus right now on advising universities on how to handle COVID in the upcoming school year. So that's interesting, right? So we slotted Mike into the first available speaker slot, and here he is. He's ready to clue us in at T-minus 2 to 3 weeks, depending, which is probably exactly when we most needed him. So that's pretty good for timing. Mike, thank you for taking a break from your band, sir, and welcome to the Ringknocker speaker chair. Without further ado, Michael Ray, tell us what you know.
So thanks, everybody, and I'm really happy to be one of your first characters in a really long list of distinguished speakers, but realizing we have something pretty timely to talk about. While I get started with a couple of ideas, for those of you who have college-age children, young adults who are attending schools right now, would you be so kind as to start pasting that in the chat? And then I'll turn to several of you in a few minutes to kind of talk about what's going on at that school this fall, how that affects your son or daughter, and also like what daily life is like with those plans for you, because I only have a few minutes of things to talk about and a few photos. So Jason, again, thanks so much. And everyone, thanks for your attention. And I look forward to seeing a few faces I know in the coming minutes. So I started my post-military career in public health. I wrote my graduate thesis on nuclear detonation response, which is a regional, low probability, yet high consequence event. But kind of like a zombie apocalypse, it's not something you worry about every day. And so after that, after the kind of dust settled from contributing to literature on that, I started working in emergency preparedness for colleges and universities in early 2009. And it just so happened I joined a CDC-funded grant for community pandemic flu preparedness before H1N1 became a thing. And since then, like off and on the side, I've worked in the idea of how do you prepare, how do you respond? How do you do isolation, quarantine, social distancing? Before that was something we read about in the news every day, and what that means for the world at large. So I'm gonna go ahead and attempt to share my screen for a few things. And Jason, do I have screen share permission? I do now, perfect. And let's go ahead and rock that. And okay, so let's go ahead and make, so when I think of a way to start viewing what's going on in the world, the first thing I do is try to get out of the bubble of the news. And several of you might be familiar with the idea of futures and foresight thinking. It's the idea of shining a flashlight in the dark. You can see a little bit of the field out there, and that would be what your possible futures are. You kind of think you know what you want to happen, but chances are what will happen will be on the edge of that flashlight beam or not in at all. There's a quick caveat. This idea of strategic thinking is really useful for organizations. It typically has a 5 to 10-year horizon, which is not as relevant here, but I use that every morning when I wake up to get out of the idea of doom scrolling the news, scanning headlines and thinking how messed up is the world today. I use what's going on in the news to think, how does what's going on in the world today apply what we're gonna do 6 months or 6 years from now? Because right now history is changing in ways we can't understand. And that fundamental ways are gonna shape what life is like on the other side of this. But for right now, it's, oh, another college closed for the fall. So as of today, there are 6,000 colleges in the United States. 3,000 of those are the ones that are typically tracked. And those are your public and private and not-for-profit institutions. So for example, the ones that you don't see tracked are like University of Phoenix, Strayer University, all the for-profits, and also federal institutions. So there's a really good tracking mechanism right now. The Center for Crisis Response at Davidson College, which tracks 3,000 colleges and universities. Here on this map, West Point, Navy, Coast Guard Academy, Air Force, they're not part of this, nor the graduate institutions like Monterey or Uniformed Services University Health Sciences. But as of today, of those 3,000 colleges being tracked, half of them are fully online for this fall. We're going to be talking about the ones that are going to be open in a mixed and blended scenario. Also, I have to admit my areas of expertise. I'm not a K through 12 guy, so I don't really understand the landscape of primary, secondary school through high school all that well. It's truly higher education institutions. When I was thinking of a way to envision this for the future, before we start talking to what your sons and daughters are doing for those people in school, I thought of kind of best and middle case and worst case scenarios. I'm going to start by talking about the best and middle case. We'll talk with all of you, and then I'll kind of wrap up how things could go horribly, horribly wrong with an example we may all know pretty well. So when I think of best case scenarios, I think of Colby College. It's a bubble this fall. So they're fully open as of August, accepting all 1,900 students on campus. But they're doing something a little bit differently than a lot of their places doing, in addition to being way up there in northern Maine, far, far away from most people. They developed a partnership with the School of Public Health at Harvard, Mass General Hospital, Maine General Health, and a large nonprofit organization. They're doing the standard daily self-assessments a lot of other places are doing, but they ordered 85,000 tests for students, faculty, and staff. And they're spending $2.5 million on it. So the same kind of plan that basketball and Major League Soccer did for July and, well, basketball for the rest of the season, create a bubble, routinely test everyone, and have a robust plan when you start seeing positive cases of really running them to ground with good isolation, quarantine, and distancing measures. They're ready for it. If I had kids, I'd be okay, and they were in college, I'd be okay sending them to Colby College. Conversely, there's another university that's in a similar size county of 100,000 people. That's University of Georgia, and you've seen it in the news a lot lately. Starting next week, right now, their plan for August 20th is they're fully open. So they are going to be doing classes from August 20th through Thanksgiving break. Remaining courses and final exams will be done virtually, which is what a lot of schools did in the spring when they shut down. But they have 24,000 tests planned, and they're only spending $1 million on it. They've received a lot of attention in the press. In fact, I saw a tweet earlier this week of a 6-foot-tall professor standing in front of a COVID barrier placed in front of the class, and it was a glass screen that came up to about here in his chest, and he was standing above it. Now, realizing Colby is a small private college with a multi-$100 million endowment. University of Georgia is a state-run institution. There are structural factors that are different between each one. But if I had children who were in college, I'd be a lot more apprehensive about sending them or them attending University of Georgia than a place like Colby College. Also, what's worth mentioning before I go back to the chat, as I'm practically done with everything I want to say for at this moment, that I live on a college campus right now. So I live on the edge of Santa Clara University, which is 5,000 students in San Jose, California, if you will, a county of 2.5 million people next to a 1 million person city. They were on board to be open for 70% of students to come back, be on campus until 8 days ago. And they pulled the plug. And there were a lot of implications to it. I'm really thankful, Jason, that we scheduled me for this moment in time. As you've seen what's happened in the news this week, multiple athletic conferences, no competition this fall. NCAA, Division II, Division III championships this fall, not happening. We're seeing that final tipping point for those last 50% of colleges and universities in the country, what they're doing. But what's happening, like, again, the sands are shifting at our feet, is the reality of, can we do this safely? Can there be enough tests purchased? Can there be enough protective measures put in place for students? Can you protect faculty and staff? Will they show up to work? And also this thing you have to think about, like if you're an administrator or leader of a school or university, for every 1,000 people that get or test positive for the disease or have symptoms, one or more of them is going to get really, really sick. And are you willing, if you lead an organization, to live with that reality? So I'm going to stop right there for a few minutes and try to find a way to probably stop sharing my screen and bounce to the chat and talk to a few of you about what's happening for your sons and daughters and how that affects your family for this fall. So one moment while we come back. Okay.
Michael, well, we're getting organized in the chat here. I've got a question just to kind of set the stage. So NCAA cancellations, schools deciding kind of changing course on opening in the fall. We've heard a lot of conflicting news, right? So we had a guy sitting in the chair that you're sitting in now a couple of months ago, who's a medical doctor, and was of the opinion that the whole thing is overblown. We've seen some stuff in the news more recently that would suggest that that may not be the case. So the question is, these schools and organizations that are pulling back now, are they panicking or are they coming to their senses?
Coming to their senses via panicking. And I got a couple anecdotes about that, and actually a story about a service academy during the last outbreak. So let's make sure we circle back around to that. But most, not as bad as hospitals, which tend to operate on 60 days cash in hand or less. That's the other industry I work in a lot, which is healthcare. A lot of colleges and universities have less than a year of operating budget and reserve. And a really big part of their ability to survive is tuition and to keep the lights on residential life expenses, the room and board part. So if you're a high ed and you only charge tuition for the year, you will have a budget shortfall. Now, a place like Harvard with a $30 billion plus endowment, with a lot of those funds being not unrestricted, totally okay. But Santa Clara University, right down the street from me, only has $1 billion endowment. So they're kind of middle of the pack for colleges and universities. By not collecting fees for the last part of the academic year, they had a multi-million-dollar budget shortfall. By not having students on campus this fall, there will be staff furloughs and layoffs. So the panic is, how do you balance protecting students, faculty, and staff? This is kind of the big picture, like single communication objective right now. How do you balance protecting students, faculty, staff, and the community? How do you do it with your mission when some of your customers want to come back? We're social creatures by nature, especially young adults. Like, I live near this campus and I see them partying like it's 2019. They're still doing their lawn drinking games du jour right now. And how do you do it in a way where you don't have, or you're able to prepare and mitigate for that 1 per 1,000 person that will get really, really sick and potentially die?
All right. Well, I'm gonna step back here and let the questions from the audience and chat and whatnot take over. But I mean, partying like it's 2019 is probably not a good idea right now, I'll tell you. Yeah.
So I'm trying to find someone who's attending tonight, and maybe you're being a little bit quiet. I'm looking through the chat Michael Chesterman. You have a few children.
Yeah, I got 3. So can you hear me okay?
Just fine.
Yes.
Okay, good. My wife's sitting here because we're like, I said, hey, hon, come on in. You need to listen to this. So we got one in Franklin and Marshall, and they're more like Colby. They're doing a blanket test in quarantine, and they've signed an agreement to behave themselves and stay on campus as much as possible. We've got one online, so that's easier, obviously. And then the last one's at Radford. She's a transfer student, And the sports teams that were already there have been partying because they're only off campus. On campus, it's been better, but now that they've been on, they're sneaking people past into buildings they're not supposed to be in because they're trying to segregate everybody. You only have access to buildings you either live in or have a class in. And if you don't have one of those, you're not supposed to be allowed in. And the college kids are being college kids. And in that county, the COVID rate's already creeping up and had been pretty stable and low.
Absolutely. Mark Hagler, you have one of your children at Claremont McKenna, another at UVA?
Yeah, that's right.
What's happening what's happening for your son or daughter at Claremont? And by the way, that's a great school to go to and a fantastic place.
Thanks. So that's my daughter, and so they're remote only. So they pulled the plug a little earlier. I think one of their sister schools, Harvey Mudd, hasn't made a decision yet. But Claremont's pulled the plug. They're remote only.
Right. And UVA.
So UVA is they're testing all the kids. They have to take my son just got sent his test, so they have to take their test before they go back. And they're a mix, a hybrid mix of online and live. So the courses that needs to take as a junior, a lot of those all of his courses that he needs to take are online, and he just doesn't think because of the nature of the course he's going to get what he needs to do it. So he's deferring this semester, and instead. But he's already living at his fraternity house, so he'll be down there. He's deferring, and then he's taking some online courses that in entertainment, essentially, that UVA doesn't offer, right? Movie production, editing, things like that. So,
and if you don't mind me asking, what's the temperature in the air among his fraternity mates? How many are living in the house? How do they live their lives?
So he's not in really a social fraternity, so it's more of an academic fraternity, but they're pretty diligent. They're very goal oriented, very focused for the most part. But to your point, college kids are going to be college kids, and they have their sororities that they're associated with, and those things I imagine are still going to happen. So, but he's got a single, so he's not rooming with anyone. He's got his own room, and good situation.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing. And how do you feel as a parent about all of this?
Well, I'm conflicted. So if you, I know you're citing statistics. If you look at their age group, though, there's it's certainly the risk to them is lower unless there's some pre-existing conditions, or that if they're immunocompromised for some other reason. I'm conflicted in that one is it's real, right? The threat's real, even though it's lower for them. But on the other hand, my daughter was very excited to go to California. We live on the East Coast, but to go to California and, experience her freshman year. A lot of the selling points to Claremont McKenna, why they got her to apply there was that, they offered a lot of special activities for freshmen, right? And so she feels like, all those have been canceled. She's going to miss them. And then, she'll just start her sophomore year and not have experienced that sort of big freshman year at Claremont. So
I'll throw a comment in here. I guess we have to be concerned not only about the threat to the kids, but also the threat to us, right? When they come home, right? I mean,
that's too. But no, I think I'm just talking strictly about the kids. But you're right. Faculty's older, so the faculty's got some issues. Parents, we're older, but again, it's the risk, at least thus far, the risk goes up dramatically with age. So the older you are, and again, that's discounting if you have comorbidities, things like that on top of that, then you're really, really at risk. But no, you want your kids to enjoy, to experience that. I mean, none of us really did, because we're all service academy guys, right? And
we don't know what they're missing.
So we didn't experience that, so to speak. But I know how my son enjoyed his freshman year, and my daughter was looking forward to it. So she's a little disappointed.
Yeah.
I think it's easier if they were already in college, as opposed to, being an incoming freshman.
Mark, you make a really interesting point, and talking about the college experience. I'm going to relate that back 1 second, but real quick, Mark W., you said your daughter leaves her LSU tomorrow. I'm going to warm prep call on you in just a moment. So Mark, you made a really interesting point. A lot of colleges and universities, especially the marquee ones, so your highly selective colleges, ones that have really unique bespoke campus experiences, they talk about it like the experience. For most of us as Service Academy alumni, we had a really distinct and unique college experience. It's very palpable, it's very real, that crosses borders and boundaries between class years. The same is true of a school like Claremont McKenna, or of Dartmouth College, or of other, especially small colleges and universities, and ones that have really distinct brands. Like if you go to University of Iowa, you will wear black and gold for the rest of your life. And that campus experience is real. And it's not a moment of saying selfish or complacency, or that you want to take caution to the wind, but wanting to be a part of that is a thing. And I totally get that. It's simply a matter of, what does transmission look like in your community? What can that organization do, that college, to keep its students, faculty, staff, and local community safe? And also, at what point is the potential cost too high? Real quick, I want to come to Mark W., and then also make sure I wrap up to keep this meeting on track and on time. Mark.
Did you have a question?
Absolutely. So you said your daughter leaves for Louisiana State University tomorrow. What's happening at that school?
Yeah, so she's an incoming freshman and very excited to be there. And as parents, our biggest concern is actually with our oldest son, who has got some health issues. And so we've been very, very cautious as a family for the last 5 months. But, there is a cost to everything you do in life. And so I'm actually quite excited for her that she's going to be able to go to campus and get out of the house, for one thing, but have a different experience than what we've had for the last 5 months. Now, as for what she's doing specifically, she's got 5 classes this fall, and 2 of them will be in person, and 3 of them will be virtual online, and she'll just attend those online from her dorm. The 2 classes that are face-to-face, interestingly, are in her dorm. So she doesn't actually have to leave her dorm. Now, that's just a coincidence that those classes happen to be taught in the dorm itself, but it'll be better than it could be otherwise. I've got no illusions. She's going to get out and make friends and be traveling around. And kids sneaking into dorms where they shouldn't be is not new this year. So my bigger concern is probably boys more than it is COVID. And so, I think all things considered, we're balancing things well. And she has promised us that she's going to wash her hands frequently and wear a mask and socially distance to the maximum amount she can. And we trust her to do so. But they won't come back. She'll stay there at school. Even if she was to contract COVID-19, they've got a quarantine dorm. At least that's what they claim. If she contracts COVID-19 or tests positive for some reason, she would go and stay in that dorm. And then if you leave at Thanksgiving, you will finish your finals remotely from home. She is planning to stay all the way until the second week of December and finish the classes and not come home for Thanksgiving. But the school is trying to prevent the coming and going from campus as much as possible.
Absolutely. And is there, do you know, or has it been shared with you as a parent and family member, to what degree tests have been ordered or are available for serial testing?
I don't have any information about that. That's not been shared.
Okay. And do you know what percent of the student body and total size will be on campus this fall?
I don't know. I know of a coworker of mine whose son is going to LSU this fall and has no classes face-to-face in the first semester. And so he had just found that out yesterday when I was talking to him. And so he's very undecided about his son going back to campus. I'm not sure what their decision is going to be. So I think if you've got face-to-face classes on your schedule, you're going to have to be there. But I don't know what percentage of the overall population doesn't have any face-to-face classes and would have the option to stay home.
Absolutely. So a couple things come to mind based upon what we just chatted about for everyone is I'm going to share a couple things I'm going to share after this meeting. A colleague of mine's putting out a book in the coming weeks talking, and I think there's already kind of a pre-release chapter through it that talks about the partial university moving forward, about the idea that like our economy, it's going to take a decade or more to rebound to where we were in 2019. Colleges and universities aren't going to be the same for the next decade either. And ways that you can mitigate the idea of everyone being there in mass gatherings and also do it safely, because yes, some institutions are online this fall. Yes, things might get a little bit hairy and come off the tracks a little bit, but eventually schools are not essential businesses for higher education, but eventually we do expect if you are enrolled in an academic program, you're going to be doing it face to face, and neither your professor nor you can wear a spacesuit when you go to class. And so that element of the world will change and get back to a sense of normal in the end. I want to share my screen here and kind of wrap up a few parting thoughts about how things could go really well. First, how things could go really wrong. But while I do that, I want to tell, as I kind of click through things here, I want to tell the story of the Coast Guard Academy that I saw a few years ago. So way back in, kind of queuing up this slide of the Theodore Roosevelt, way back in 2010, I attended this conference of higher education emergency preparedness planners in New England. And one of the speakers of this conference was this super senior public health service captain physician who was the senior medical officer at the Coast Guard Academy in summer 2009. That summer, during swab summer for the cadets there was an outbreak of H1N1 on campus. And there was testing, and it was identified early, and there were some 20 to 40 cadets out of the total population that tested positive for the disease, which in 2009 wasn't really that big of a deal. It was a flu. Yes, some people got sick, some people died, but what they did was really interesting, and all of us in the audience were kind of gasping of, you did what? So way back in 2009, there were some cases that were identified. They were laboratory confirmed of H1N1 through student cadets that had influenza-like illness. Those that tested positive were quarantined in rooms. Other cadets brought them meals. There were isolation efforts to keep clusters at bay. There was instant social distancing. There was a hospital clean done of campus and of surrounding buildings, and each cadet was instructed to do a deep clean of their room. And for us, most of us are Service Academy alumni, we're thinking like, oh, you were ordered to deep clean your room. That's no big deal. But sitting with a bunch of administrators, uniformed campus safety and police, so college cops, if you will, and others, the atmosphere in the room was like jaws were on the floor of, that's crazy. Because in 2009, the idea of social distancing really wasn't a word, really didn't enter pop culture routinely until the movie Pandemic came out several years later. And it was this moment of, you can do this. You can keep people safe. You can stop an outbreak in its tracks. With that, I want to kind of go to the worst case scenario example of what can happen in something that we saw recently. And I served aboard a CVN 13 years ago, and this is really kind of near and dear to me as well. How bad it could get. So for some colleges that resume full on-campus presence or blended learning, summer on campus this fall, they could experience widespread transmission of COVID-19. There could be, in response, that institution could start to ramp down its contact and send students home early. So close dormitories, close on-campus residences, kind of get everyone out and send them home, much like a lot of schools did this spring. Like Santa Clara University shut down before spring break and said, don't come back, and let students move out of the dorms this summer on a staggered rolling basis. I mentioned that kind of that thumb rule. There's a lot of kind of epidemiology is a very messy science, but like there's a lot of kind of thumb rule math that many of us used in our operational careers. That 1 per 1,000 statistic I really like to use. There's other things of like, if you have a case positive rate of greater than 5%, it really doesn't indicate you have the epidemic under control, and it can get in the math behind that. But that's a really good example. And I like to say that the Theodore Roosevelt is the college cruise ship conundrum. People in really close proximity to themselves. The statistics here are terrifying, but this is what could happen. So the crew that deployed on that ship was 4,800. There were over 1,100 cases identified, so a case positivity rate of 20%. 9 people were hospitalized, and later a convenience sample, so like a fast kind of testing pool. This was published in a CDC report. 300 people were later tested. 60% of those people had antibodies. They were exposed to the disease. So this went through the ship bow to stern. And one of my friends who's a SWO who couldn't be here tonight, his favorite analogy of there's an outbreak on a ship. How many people are going to have the disease? Everybody. And the college dorms don't have 40, 50 people birthing spaces, but they're kind of similar to that. I want to close with telling the stories of 2 people, one who I knew really well and another you might have heard of, that are on the other side of this story. And it's really important to think about that. So this is a picture of Chief Petty Officer Robert Thacker. He's an aviation ordnanceman, and he is that one crew member aboard the Theodore Roosevelt who didn't make it. So he was found unresponsive in an isolation unit. He was transferred to an ICU. Several days later, with his wife at his side, who's also a sailor, she's an AO1, he died. He's survived by Samantha and 2 kids. He's 40 years old. I'm 40 years old. And that's something that's really important to think about. Another story I want to tell is from the H1N1 outbreak. So that was from April 2009 to April 2010, when the disease was brought under sufficient control, and it rolled into seasonal flu, and it's part of our vaccination panel every year based upon how people across the globe guess for flu vaccines. There were 60 million cases in the United States, 250,000 people were hospitalized, 12,000 people died before the vaccine became available in October 2009 and was put in the arms and noses of most of us, if not all of us here. This is the story of Henry Masters, who was a graduate student in his first term of public health studies at Dartmouth College. Henry was 25 years old. He worked with disadvantaged populations and at-risk youth in Boston. He had a real passion for taking the problems of the world onto his shoulders. He made them his problems. He was a leader among his peers. He and I remember when I worked with him as a student, he had this unvarnished and completely candid way of telling you that this was great or this completely sucked. So my favorite memory of Henry was sitting in the back of the classroom one day during a lecture that wasn't going that well. I was a teaching assistant. We were staying in the back. He was towering over me because I'm only 5'9", and he was well over 6 feet tall. He looked at me and was like, yeah, this lecture. And I was like, I know, just bear with it. Get through it, man. He got sick in October of that year. He was later hospitalized. I remember emailing with him when he was in the hospital, hoping he returned to class, but he had a history of autoimmune disease. And in November of 2009, Henry died. And he was the first death in the Dartmouth College community. It really rocked campus and it shaped who I have become to this day. I spoke at his funeral. I helped set up an award in his name every year for students that carry his torch, that really truly care about the problems of the world and working with those who are disadvantaged populations. And the irony is that a student who was studying public health for grad school died of H1N1 complications. I don't want that story to be true of anyone. And you can operate a university safely, you can operate an employer safely, but you have to do it in a really thoughtful way. And the world is changing and it's going to be different for quite some time to come. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and say thank you so much for sharing a few stories and indulging me for a couple minutes about about what could happen this fall.
Mike, thanks so much for that story. It's sobering, right? I have one last question that I'd like to ask, and then we're going to move on to updates and intros, and hopefully, well, almost certainly, after that, during the discussion period, we'll probably come back and address this further. But one quick question, just this is actionable, okay? We've talked about the availability of tests at different schools, and obviously it ranges, right? But what I don't know, and I'm sure many of the others here don't either, is the answer to the question, what does good look like? In other words, as a parent, should I be looking for my student to be tested every week, every month, every other day? Like what's reasonable? Can you address that?
So what's reasonable is I think you have to look at it in several dimensions. One, what does that local community look like? And so I mentioned the case of Colby College. As of today, there are 120,000 people in that county of Kennebec County, Maine, and there have been 171 confirmed cases. You put 1,600 students on a campus, you reduce how porous it is to the community, you spend a lot of effort on testing and treat it like a bubble, and 100% it's completely safe. That is applying the best concepts of epidemiology. If you have a large campus that substantially adds to the population of a community, or one that is in one of the hotspots in the United States, AKA every major city, and you're faced with tests that come back 14 days later, you only have access. I think someone who was attending a Ringknocker group recently is in the business of providing tests to private organizations. You don't have that access to that many tests. You're backstopping on local public health resources. You are kind of crossing your fingers when you're inviting 70 or 100% of your students back that everything's going to be okay. And you think you're going to make it to Thanksgiving as flu season ramps up. I'm a little bit less optimistic about that scenario. It could work out fine. I don't,
Gotcha.
and I want to kind of relate this back to operational military, to operational issues. An aircraft carrier recently returned from deployment, didn't pull in anywhere, didn't bring anyone on the ship other than people who were rotating on and off via COD, and did more maintenance at sea, of more maintenance evolutions at sea than ever before. No one got sick. You can do this. And the service academies are operating right now. So for example, the Naval Academy in West Point are going through reform, like everyone's coming back. There's tons of testing. The Naval Academy anticipates testing 10 to 15% of its students or midshipmen, faculty and staff per week.
Wow.
Yeah, and also reducing Bancroft Hall occupancy by a full like 600 or 1,000 people. I'm not sure, at least in the news, where those people are going to go for right now. Like several midshipmen might not come back this fall, but also I was thinking back to the ways you keep people healthier is you don't put them in 4 and 5 person dorm rooms. There aren't that many in the hall in Bancroft. If you completely sanitize everything every day, if you have students who are no more than 6 feet together in classrooms with professors who are wearing spacesuits, they're not coming in contact with members of the community that much. All those are in place. And oh, by the way, it's a service academy. You can give people orders and they'll follow it. You can say, don't party or don't go out, and we will comply because we did. Yeah,
What's
I
new?
would. Yeah, that would work out totally fine.